الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome to our next installment of Fiqh Hour. It's been some time since we last spoke. I think it was possibly August. Have been busy pretty much last few months, and even more so in this last month, particularly focusing on Waqf. So you may have seen some of my posts on Waqf and how we're trying to, inshallah, with your help, of course, institutionalize the whole concept of Waqf and how it can support local or national charities, masajid, Darul Ulooms, schools, and even personally as families, and eventually individuals as well, and of course businesses. So that's what I've been sort of busy with over the last few weeks and months, inshallah. And as is practice, what we normally do is we wait for the number of questions that we have to generate to a certain amount before we take on, inshallah, the discussion. So let's get straight into it. First set of questions that we have, ladies group. Scroll up to the last session. And the first question that we have is, Assalamu alaikum, Mufti Sahib, wa alaikum salam. Hope you're well. Alhamdulillah, all is good. Pray likewise for yourself, sister. My question is, if a munfarid's wudu breaks accidentally during salah, can they make a fresh wudu and complete the rest of the salah? So technically speaking, yes, they can do that. They can go without talking, without any excessive movements, without any distractions, make their way to the wudu area, perform wudu, and come back and carry on from where they left off. This is what's referred to as bina. However, it is preferable that this person restarts their salah. That is the preferred position. And as most people aren't fully aware of the kind of rules associated with it, of how they should behave, then it is better that we all just terminate our prayer because of the nullification of our wudu and restart afresh next when we return. Next question is, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I have a question regarding sadaqah. When I give sadaqah, I make the niyyah on behalf of my late mother. In this case, will I also share in the reward of this sadaqah? Will I receive the full reward, a portion of it, or none at all? Please clarify this matter as I'm somewhat confused. Jazakumullah khairan. So this is what we refer to as isal thawab. And as you said in your question, when I give sadaqah, I make the niyyah on behalf of my late mother. So your niyyah is that this sadaqah is solely for your mother. And because you have made niyyah that this is for your mother, then you're not expected to get any reward for it. I guess the reward you can get for it is keeping good ties with your mother, yani still valuing your relationship with her, acknowledging your relationship with her, showing her the same love and affection and respect that you showed her when she was alive, now that she's passed away. So yes, that is fine. But with the actual act of sadaqah, you clearly say in the question that I make the niyyah on behalf of my late mother, meaning you do not include yourself in the niyyah. So if you included yourself in the niyyah, then yes, you would get reward for it. Ya Allah, with this sadaqah, reward me and reward my late mother. You could have included, the ummah as well. So, there's no restrictions in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarding people. The restriction is what you've qualified it yourself. And therefore, in this particular case, because you said you make niyyah on behalf of your late mother only, then obviously there is only reward for her. That is that. Next is gents group. Where are we? Scroll up. There we are. So there is a question that's come on here. Assalamu alaikum. Please confirm that one can start using a product they have bought online and in store, but the bank account shows that the money is still pending transaction. Yeah, wa alaikum salam. That once the purchase has been made, the ijab and kabul has been done, and you have received the product, then even if they themselves haven't received the money yet, then that's fine, because obviously the contract has been fulfilled and they've also sent the product out. So therefore, the transaction is complete. This is what we refer to as a kind of delayed payment on your part, rather than anything else. So there is no issue, there is no concern. So yes, you may use it. Assalamu alaikum. If we have an account for a 14-year-old child and pay zakat on the savings every year, but we borrow money from it to pay off something, is zakat still payable on the money that has been lent? I see a number of times these type of questions come up. The first part, we need to see clarity on this, and this is what I call mixed money, because the parent has said it is on behalf of the child, but then the parent is benefiting from it, just using it. So it says here, if we have an account for a 14-year-old child, so it says here we have an account for a 14-year-old child. So I'm assuming by that the parents have set up an account for their 14-year-old child. So if they have set up the account for the 14-year-old child, then the 14-year-old child owns that money. And if the 14-year-old child owns that money, then they can't do as they please with that money, because it's not their money. If they've transferred that money across to if they've transferred that money across to the individual, okay, if the money has been transferred over to the child, then that money has been transferred to the child. And if that money has been transferred to the child, then the child owns the money. So we can't now, as we please, go into their account. I appreciate we still have access from a UK law. I'm assuming this has come from the UK. Well, I know we have still access to the money because we have the account details. We might even have the online banking because we've set it up. So as a guardian, we continue to have access to it. But really, that's it. We are a guardian. We are not the owner of that money. So we can't choose to lend that money out. Okay. The next part is that we pay zakat on the savings every year. Now, if the child owns the money and the child is not baligh, okay, the child owns the money, the child is not baligh, then there is no zakat due from a Hanafi perspective. So if the child owns the money and it belongs to the child, then from a Hanafi perspective, there is no zakat due. Okay, the zakat is only due when it is owned by a mature person, yani somebody who is past bulugh, then zakat is due. So that then again begs the question that who actually is the owner of this wealth? Because again, it seems as though the parents are saying, and we pay, I don't say we pay one, but we pay zakat on the savings every year. So it seems in reality that it's actually the parents that own the money and not the child. So even though it's in the child's name, in reality, it's still the parents' money, because why they're paying zakat on it, okay? But if we borrow money from it to pay off something, and then that doesn't make sense, because why would you borrow your own money? If it's your money, because you're giving zakat on it, why are you now borrowing it? So that seems to suggest it's the child's money. So if it's a child's money, then there's no zakat due upon it. Is zakat still payable on the money that has been lent? So that's why this question is confusing. So I hope that by trying to unpack that question, I've made it quite clear to you. Also, can one buy from a company being in the process of being sold or going through a change of ownership or bankruptcy? Well, if that company is still legally allowed to sell products, then yes, one can buy products from them, irrespective of where they are in the process of ownership. Okay, if that entity is selling and it can legally sell products, it owns those products. That's the key thing, because if there's a changing of ownership, then as long as the person or the business that's selling the products owns them, then yes, they can sell them, as long as they're not selling somebody else's products. So if at the time, I appreciate there's a process for change of ownership, but if at the time the owners, the directors, whoever it is that owns that business, if they are the ones who are obviously actioning their staff to sell products, as they are the owners, they're the shareholders, and you're purchasing it from them, then that's absolutely fine. Even if there is a process of change of ownership that the directors are now potentially selling up and selling to the highest bidder or something like that. Similarly, in bankruptcy, If the company that is going bankrupt is selling goods, then that's fine. But usually, the company that's selling goods, the company that's going bankrupt, usually somebody comes and buys that company or who they owe money to. Their debtors come, and when their debtors come, then those debtors will actually take the goods and sell them in order to reclaim back their money. Assalamu alaikum, respected ulama. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I have a student loan. On my zakat date of the 11th of Muharram 1447, I calculated that the government was due to deduct around £700 in payments for the upcoming year towards my long-term loan. So I deducted this amount from my zakatable assets. However, I did not pay my zakat immediately after making the calculation and still owe it. Since then, my situation has changed. I recently got a new job with a salary increase, and now the government will be deducting around £2,000 for the same zakat year. Am I allowed to recalculate my zakatable assets and reduce it by this new repayment amount, even though the increase in deductions was decided after my zakat date? So when you're determining your zakat that is due, then that is the zakat which is due at that time in that place. And you base your calculations on that particular instant. So you will deduct any forthcoming debts. So if you feel there will be these forthcoming debts, then you will deduct them. And you will also determine what assets you have at that time. It might be that, 6 weeks later, you lose all your money. So you say, well, I've lost all my money now, so there should be no zakat due. Well, no, because at the time you calculated your zakat, you had money, so you still owe that. So rather than, reassessing things kind of as time proceeds forward, based on your zakat date, do your calculation and give the zakat accordingly. If, on the other hand, you have given over zakat, then obviously there is a readdress to that. So in the following year, you can give less. So there's no issue there. If, for example, there's a liability that comes up, a debt which comes up, but you see, these debts are hard to predict at the time. But if there's some other liability which came up that you weren't aware of, and you find that you actually overpaid your zakat, then there is a way to address that, inshallah. But if obviously that isn't the case, then obviously it's hard for the person. So basically, bottom line is that once you have determined your zakat date, whichever your anniversary is, then give the zakat accordingly on that anniversary date. Okay. Next one is Assalamu alaikum. Forwarded question. I am a Muslim following the Hanafi school of, it says school of thought, but obviously means school of law, and traveled to London for 13 days. I was confused about when qasr should be performed and when it is not required. And so sometimes I prayed 4 and sometimes I prayed 2. I understand in the Hanafi madhab, if you travel a distance of 48 miles, 77 kilometers or more, you are considered a musafir. As a musafir, the 4 rakat, Fajr 2 and Maghrib 3 remain the same, no shortening. The question I have is regarding the following scenario. During Asr Salah, I initially made the intention to pray 4 rakats, but after completing 3 rakats, I remembered that as a traveler, I should only pray 2 rakats according to Hanafi fiqh. I then ended the prayer after 3 rakats by performing sujood as-sahw. In this situation, was my salah valid, and what is the correct ruling? So firstly, it's always best to get answers to your questions before you end up in that situation. So you mentioned here that I was confused about Qasr Salah. So that would have been the time to ask somebody that, look, I appreciate that when I'm a Musafir, that my Salah is shortened, but I'm not sure how, when, and the manner in which it should be done. Please, can you inform me? And obviously somebody could inform you and you could then act accordingly. However, this is something that you've obviously addressed after the event. And so that has been the issue. Secondly, the position that I tend to adopt is not necessarily 48 miles, but 55 miles. That I feel is a more accurate position to adopt. And yes, you're quite right. All the 4 rakats prayers are shortened to 2, and the 3 rakat Maghrib remains as it is. the 3 rakats witr remains as it is, and the 2 rakats fajr remains as it is. You then accidentally prayed 3 rakats, and then you realized, oh, I should have prayed only 2, and then you broke your salah at that point. What you should have done is you should have just carried on and added a 4th one. If you added a 4th one, then that would have been valid, because the first 2 rakats would have been your fard, and the second 2 rakats would have considered as a nafil. However, instead you broke it, and then you did sajda sahwa. And as there is no single rakat salah, it would be better for you in these circumstances is to actually repeat that prayer as a 2 rakats. Assalamu alaikum, Mufti. I hope you are well. My local masjid Isha time sets in 50 minutes before the wifaq time. I hope you're well. My local masjid Isha time sets in 50 minutes before wifaq time. Is it permissible to pray in Jamaat with my local masjid, even though I follow wifaq time for Ud Salah? Okay. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. So when we have a salah time, then obviously we should stick to that salah time. Now, when you say you follow the wifaq time, then obviously which wifaq time are you following for Isha? Because if you look at the app, then there is a Amjad time and Ahmar time. So that's the first question. So if you have set it at Amjad, but the masjid is playing at Ahmar, then that's fine. And then what I would do is I would stick to Ahmad throughout rather than chopping and changing. If, on the other hand, Ahmad time hasn't come in, then my personal view is that you should obviously wait until Ahmad time comes in. There is no Isha before its time. I appreciate on the Wifaq app, there is a Haraj option. And that was only because of hours and hours of due deliberation amongst many ulama up and down the country that sat down in order to try to resolve this with pragmatism at the fore in order to give a solution to the Muslims in the UK. And it seemed that, or it was proposed, that it would still be difficult in certain months of the year for Muslims to wait for Isha time, waiting for Ahmad to come in. So then this concocted position was developed, which is referred to as Haraj time. So but the ulama have said this is a feasible solution, and therefore you can act on the fatwa of those ulama and follow the Haraj time. As I said, me personally, I do not pray Isha until its time comes in, which is either Haraj or Ahmad or Amjad. Hope I clarified that for you. Next question. Assalamu alaikum. When does a non-Muslim be condemned to hellfire for eternity? I heard them hearing just the word Islam or Prophet ﷺ's name makes them accountable to research. But that doesn't really make sense, since we wouldn't look into prophethood of, say, Joseph Smith just because someone mentioned it in passing. What entails receiving and rejecting Islam, and is it differed upon? Please explain. Jazakallahu khair. Okay, so when does a non-Muslim be condemned to hellfire for eternity? I think this is a question which doesn't really concern us as such, especially since this is fiqh hour and not aqidah hour, because obviously this is a matter of aqidah. So there are differing views, as you say right at the end of your question. There are differing views as to what would be considered sufficient knowledge. There should be sufficient there that gives them time to reject it. Okay, I think that's probably the best position to give you, is that they've had time to understand it and reject it, because that is kufr. Kufr is when somebody understands something and rejects it. Because even if a Muslim, God forbid, utters words of kufriya, yani something which is verses of the Quran or something which exists in the Quran, and they reject those, then it is said, the ulama will explain to this person that, look, this is a verse of the Quran, this is what it is, this is what it means. Yani, and then the person realizes and says, Astaghfirullah, yani atubu ilayk. I didn't know that, this was a verse of the Quran, and I seek sincere repentance for uttering those words. And that, that doesn't mean that because he said something previously that he's become a kafir, because he didn't understand obviously what he was saying. Unfortunately, he was a jahil and he uttered words out of jahiliyyah. But once it was made clear to him that, look, you can't utter these words, this is not a position you can adopt because of this verse, and that person makes tawbah, then absolutely fine. I guess just to make himself feel better, he can repeat the shahada, he can, do those things, but, we would adopt the position that he's not a kafir. Similarly, for a person to be considered as a kafir, he has to reject the particular position that there is no God, na'udhu billah min zalik, or that there is no prophet that was ever sent, name of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They'd have to deny it, because kufriya is denial, jahiliya is different, so raib is different, it's having doubt. Assalamu alaikum. Question on riba. Some smaller shops offer cashback when using a credit debit card when no cash machine is available. However, they charge a small fee. So, for example, if I need £20 cash, the shop will make a transaction of £21 and give me £20 cash, whilst the £1 is their so-called charge. Is this considered as riba, to pay or to charge? Some cash machines also charge a small fee to withdraw cash. Does this come under riba too? Many shops also charge a small fee if paying by card. This charge is fixed if spending a small amount. Although the business may get charged for using the services, they most likely cover their expenses anyway. So is it right for them to also charge if less than the specified minimum amount is spent? Will this charge also come under riba too? Okay, so when we're talking about riba, we're talking about riba where there is an exchange, say, for example, then it has to be like for like, hand to hand. Okay, this is the riba which comes in the hadith of the 6 things that should be exchanged hand to hand, like for like. So I guess what the question is saying is that in this case, it is hand to hand, or as immediate as you can, because you hand your £20 over. Sorry, you don't hand your £20 over, you hand your debit card over. He puts it in the machine and he gives you £20. Okay, so that's as close as it, that's as near as it gets. Okay, but when he gives you that £20, then you're getting like for like. You've given £20 and you've received £20. Okay, the difference is that he's charging £1 for his service or whatever he's charging. So it's not as though he's making money on you, because you gave him £20 and you've taken back £20. So you've got what you gave. Exactly. I appreciate it's not instantaneous, but almost instantaneous, because obviously, unfortunately, trust issues are quite low, and therefore the vendor will expect you to give him the money first before he gives you money out of the machine. So it's as close as practically possible that is like for like, hand to hand. And then there's a charge for the fee that he's doing this work for you. So it's not like, you're giving him £20 as a loan and he's giving you £21 back, because it's not a loan. You're not giving this as a loan. All you're doing is and it's not even an exchange. You're not giving him £20 as an exchange, because what he's doing is he's taking your £20 out and he's giving you your £20 back. Okay. So whereas an exchange would be, I would give you my £20 and you would give me your £21, or I would give you £21, which is what's happening in this case. I would give you £21 and you would give me £20, but that's not happening, because you're giving me your card. You're not giving me £21, and I'm giving you £20 out of your card. But I'm also saying that I'm going to charge you £1 for what I just did for you, because this is my cost. I have to have this fancy machine, or whatever the costs are, or I've taken out 10 minutes of my time carrying out this act for you where I could have been serving another customer. So we would consider that to be permissible. A widowed woman and her children have been living under the care of her brother-in-law, who is the only sibling remaining. A widowed woman and her children have been living under the care of her brother. Okay. She's living under the care of her brother-in-law. That's strange. How could a woman be living under the care of her brother-in-law, who is the only sibling remaining? I'm assuming sibling of her not ex-husband, but ex-husband, but her husband who's died. The brother-in-law oversees the deceased brother's assets. Okay, that makes sense. The widowed woman who has a son not reached the age of puberty and 2 daughters who have reached the age of puberty, Who is responsible for the living costs of the children? Well, why is the brother-in-law overseeing the deceased brother's assets? What should happen is, when the brother passed away, then the inheritance should have been distributed. And based on the explanation here, the distribution would have meant that all of it would have gone to the children and the wife, ex-wife, because he's dead, his widow rather, assuming there's no parents alive. So therefore, there would be no financial costs, because whatever his properties, his wealth, everything would have come to them. And then obviously the widowed woman would help her children. She wouldn't need to kind of, depends how old the daughters are, because there's two daughters who have reached the age of puberty. I don't know how old they are. They could be only 15 years old, or they could be 25, Allahu A'lam. She will just act as a guardian of her children's wealth to make sure, because she's looking after them, to make sure that they are receiving, they're getting, they're getting looked after. Now, I guess the brother-in-law or the uncle can look after his nieces and nephews' wealth and make sure they spend it properly. So there is some possibility there, but he can't take anything from that. If the widowed woman remarries, will the new husband be responsible for the living costs of the woman and any children living with her, or only the woman's? Remember, even if the widow marries, her inheritance is still due from her ex-husband, as is the children. So the brother will not hold on to those assets thinking that, oh, well, I'm his brother, so I hold it. The brother has no share in this. He will have to give those assets. And if the widow woman remarries, then obviously her new husband is now responsible for her. Nobody else is responsible for her, but she would still take her share of the inheritance. That's a separate matter. The children obviously will continue to be supported by the grandparent if he's alive and is wealthy, and to support that. But like I said, the assets that they've got from the inheritance would cover. But really, if the two girls are above puberty, again, I don't know the age, then once they become of marriageable age, they should be married, because then they have a then they can be looked after as well. Who is ultimately responsible for the cost of the widow and her children? I hope I've explained that in detail. And the other thing is as well, is I appreciate we ask for the Shari'i ahkam, but nowadays many women work, okay, so they're earning a livelihood. So even though we talk about a traditional setup, there's very rarely a traditional setup in our houses now. This used to be a traditional setup going years ago, when the only so-called breadwinner, we don't even eat bread now, but the so-called breadwinner was the husband or the father. And he was the only person who earned, and he would bring money in. And therefore, the wife would stay at home all day, and she would look after the children, and she would look after the house, and she would do all the cooking, and she would do all the domestic duties. And the father, the husband, would do no domestic duties. He would spend most of his day outside working, and he would earn the money. And then obviously somebody needed to buy food. Somebody needed to, buy a house. Somebody needed to cover the heating. Somebody needed to cover the water, the electric. So they would use his money, and everybody would use it. The children were obviously children, and the wife would use it. So the wife is providing a service to the team, and the husband is providing a service to the team. But I think those kind of family structures have changed. Is in very, very few communities now do those family structures exist. Most of the time now, both adults, both husband and wife, are working, and they're both earning. So, we can't pick and choose where the Sharia applies and where the Sharia does not apply. So, we can't say, oh, all the, responsibility is on you, Mr. Husband, and the wife does not fulfill her side of the agreement. So, as I said, you can't have it both ways, basically. But I hope that deals with that particular question. Let me just grab some questions which have come on the groups. One question here. Assalamu alaikum, Mufti. It's just me. Just a reminder. If I borrow 1.5 million at 6% for the first 5 years, and then up to the base rate plus 2% for the next 5 years, the lender will loan that amount. He is okay with us saying something like the rent will be based on the base rate plus 2%. The base rate is interest rate UK, just for reference, it will be a 10-year loan. I will pay the amount that will be like interest, rent only. I will then pay him chunks every year to reduce the amount borrowed. My only concerns are by law, the solicitors will draft up, and any loan given is protected. The lender has the right to repossess the property. The rent is not paid. He's happy to sign a private document between us stating any payments I made will equate to equity. And if we had sold the site, I get percentage what I paid into. So obviously, this is clearly riba, and this would not be permissible. Okay, it is not permissible to engage in ribawi transactions. The way this could be structured better is to say, right, okay, if I pay cash now, it's whatever, 1.5 million. But if I pay in installments over 10 years, then it's 2.5 million price. That's it. He just sets a different price and says, okay, as you're paying me over installments, it's 2.5 million. And so what he would do now is he would pay, paying back the equity over that period of time, over 10 years, paying 2.5 million. And that's it. Otherwise, this is structured as a loan, and any loan which has a extra on it is impermissible. Okay. Next question, which is, I guess, a question which comes up very often. So I think, we can really touch upon this, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear respected Mufti. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We pray this message finds you in the best of health and iman. We are seeking your respected guidance regarding the attendance of very young children in the masjid. The question we wish to ask is, should children who are 5 years old or younger be permitted to come to the masjid if they are accompanied by their parents? Furthermore, in the case of a single parent who is solely responsible for a child of this age, would it be correct for us to have a general policy that does not allow children under 5 to attend at all? Or should such cases be approached individually on a case-by-case basis? We would be most grateful for your advice and direction on this matter. Jazakallahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so this is a question which I saved till last because our dear respected Maulana Sahib will be finished from his duties of Asr, and therefore he will be able to listen to the answer. Even though this is being recorded, so I guess you could listen to it at any time. We make special provisions for the dear ulama that ask these questions. So sometimes we hear these ahadith about the fact that the Prophet ﷺ heard a child crying, and he says, I shortened the prayer so as not to harm the mother. We know obviously his granddaughter would climb on him, and he would, when he would go into ruku, sajda rather, he would place her on the ground, perform sajda, and then pick her back up. And we have these kind of conversations, and therefore you get people happening more now than before saying, oh, look, that shows clearly that children should come to the masjid. And literally they should be any age, because that child that was crying must have been a toddler or a baby. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was carrying his granddaughter clearly suggests that she was also either a toddler or a baby. Otherwise, he could possibly not even a toddler, because he would have left her to stand rather than picking her up. And that shows, they use that as evidence. And then we have this hadith, which is sometimes quoted by people. And this hadith mentions, where have we got it? The hadith mentions that Jannibu masajidakum sibyanakum wa majaninakum wa shira'akum wa bay'akum. And this hadith, which is Sunan Ibn Majah, mentions, keep your children, your insane, and your buying and selling away from the masjid. So some people have said, okay, that clearly shows that there is no space or room at all for children. So we have one argument that there's clearly evidence in the time of the Prophet ﷺ in which there were children heard in the masjid, children crying in the masjid. And then likewise, we then have this hadith which says that that children should not be brought to the masjid at all. So how do we kind of do what's called, to kind of reconciliate between these, what seem to be on the face of it, contradictory narrations? Firstly, the hadith which I quoted to you, Sunan Ibn Majah, has been said by most people to be considered as weak. And therefore it won't be considered in this argument. However, I think, and this is a however that's very important, our masjids now are very different to the masjids in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. I'll explain to you why. For instance, the Prophet, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, people would pray with their shoes on in the masjid. There would be no issue with praying with your shoes on, as long as there was no najasat on them. We know, for example, the Prophet ﷺ removing his shoes, and then the Sahaba following and removing their shoes. And then when it was said to them that, oh, why did you remove your shoes? And they said, obviously, we saw you. And the Prophet ﷺ explained that Jibreel ﷺ explained to me that I had some najasa on my shoes, hence I removed them. We also know that there were no doors on the masjid. So there's some narrations which mention dogs coming in and out through the masjid. We know, obviously, of the story of the individual, the Bedouin, that comes and unfortunately relieves himself in the corner of the masjid. And the Sahaba are instructed to bring some water and pour the water and cleanse the masjid in that way. We also know, for instance, the tribe, either Ethiopian tribe or a Sudanese, I think it was Ethiopian tribe, that came to the masjid and they were practicing spear throwing in the masjid, and the Prophet ﷺ watched them. So we can see the masjid was very different to the way we have masjid now. Nobody would, in their right mind, would walk with their shoes into the masjid at all. No one would allow animals to roam in the masjid at all. And the aim and the provision was to make sure the masjid is kept clean. Okay, so what is the issue with children? Let's explore that. What is the issue with not having children in the masjid in the first place, or what's the concern of having them rather in the masjid? There's two concerns really with children in the masjid. The first concern is najasa, is impurity. Okay, that's the first concern. For instance, if children aren't toilet trained, and that can happen any age, it can happen anything between the age of 3 to 5 years old, even some 6. And unfortunately, some children still continue to, wet themselves as they get older. It's not like a given rule that suddenly at one particular age, everything just stops. So the issue is najasa. That's the first thing, because obviously spilling urine on a carpet is very difficult to clean. And secondly, if we're unaware of it, that becomes another issue. Apart from when you make sajda, you smell it and think, okay, something's not right here. And the second point is the distraction and the noise that a child might make. Okay, some people might say, yeah, but what about the distraction of the young child that was crying when the Prophet ﷺ shortened his prayer? Some muhaddithun have said that child was actually in a home near the masjid, and the mother had left the child and come to pray salah, and he felt now that this woman will be concerned about her child in her house, and she won't be focusing too much on her salah. And therefore, in order not to cause more fitna for her, because she'll be thinking, my child's crying and her tawajjuh is not on her salah anymore, she may wish to kind of, go and tend to the child. So for that reason, he shortened it. So the child was not actually there. And obviously, we know the Prophet ﷺ had many exceptions. We don't see any of the other Sahaba bringing their grandchildren to the masjid. This hadith mentions that the Prophet ﷺ did. And we know there's exceptions for him in many other cases as well. So therefore, there's no necessarily absolute, unequivocal proof of very young children in the masjid. So the ulama say that these are the two issues. The issues is of najasat, and the issue is of distraction. So if it can be demonstrated by a child that they have no, toileting issues, okay, and they have no, they're disciplined, meaning they'll just stand in salah, pray, and that's it. Or they've got a father or an elder brother or somebody who's going to take responsibility for them, then it's not an issue. Okay, it's not an issue. However, and I don't say this lightly either. I think, we have to be a little bit sort of smart as well, that, having just children kind of in masjids, remember, we don't have, or generally speaking, the masjids that I frequented don't have separate sort of toilet facilities for children. They are public toilets. So if children are using public toilets, then nowadays anybody has access to the masjid, and doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's coming with the best of intentions either. Aliyadu billah. We've seen plenty of videos of people coming to the masjid in order to steal. We've seen, so many other things that go on. Astaghfirullah. It's a different world we live in, and so we can't be naive either. We can't just hark back to the good old golden days and kind of force that into this new context we find ourselves in. We have to be realistic. So, would you feel comfortable of just having your 4 or 5 year old, you're in salah, your 4 or 5 year old wanders off to go to the toilet or whatever, you're in salah now, you can't walk off. Your focus is on your salah. You finish your salah, now you're looking for your kid, and you don't know where your kid is. Okay, so really, this is a parental responsibility. It's not something that they should kind of wash their hands off. That, and if the question also mentioned that, in some cases the single mother just sends her son in to pray because she doesn't have anybody in the house that could take her child, and she wants the child associated with masjid, which is very good, and she sends the child in to pray salah. But if that child is alone, astaghfirullah, like I said, it's a place that we have to be a little bit careful about. Let's not be naive that, it's a house of Allah and everybody is angelic in there. Absolutely not. We are responsible for our children. So like we wouldn't let our child go anywhere else as a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old alone, unchaperoned, especially when we're going to toilets which are shared by, full grown men. So when they go to a toilet, the cubicle next to them could be a full grown man. Okay. So, these are things we have to think about. I appreciate that, it might be language that we're not familiar with, but, there's no point sticking our head in the sand and feeling. So, we have to take all this into context. But also there is the excellent side. I want to balance this whole conversation. There is the excellence of instilling in the male child anyway, the masjid and the mahal of the masjid, the environment of the masjid, and inculcating within him the regularity of going for the 5 daily prayers. So that's good. When we look at the actual advice the Prophet ﷺ gives of when to start enjoining upon your child prayer, he then says, ﷺ says 7 years old. 7 years old is the age where you should start to now inculcate in your child prayer. Now it's 7 years lunar years, which is not that different than 7 solar years. It's about 2 months short, really, approximately 2.5 months short. So in reality, 7 is a good enough. Okay, if you want to be awkward and pedantic, then 6.5 years. Okay, so around 6.5 years or 6 3/4. See, I'm still being pedantic. At that particular stage, the child is now being instructed to pray salah. So really, if he's got a father, a brother, or whatever, then he should be going now with his father and his brother to the masjid, rather than necessarily praying at home, because he's going to become a habit of praying at home, and that's a place for the women to pray, and he will start to kind of get used to praying with women, and that's not necessarily a good thing for him. So going to the masjid is a good thing for him. So we know there's a line around 7 years old that they should be going to pray. Okay, we know there's a line around 7. Where it's absolutely not a requirement. And then obviously at 10, the Prophet Islam absolutely is firm about a child being instructed to pray. And then obviously when they're baligh, it is now wajib, farad rather, to pray. There's no kind of, ambiguity at all. So there is that kind of scale up, right, that exists. So I would say, rather than having a fast rule to say, look, what's your age? Because what are you going to do? You're going to tell the parent to bring a birth certificate with them? I've seen some 4-year-olds that look like, 7 8-year-olds. And I've seen some 7 8-year-olds that look like 3-year-olds. So, you can't say, okay, you can only come in if you bring your birth certificate. We're going to check your birth certificate. That doesn't mean anything either. So you're going to have to bring a passport. But what if the child doesn't have a passport? Because you could bring a birth certificate, and it could be a birth certificate of an elder child and not of this particular child. What are you going to do? Call his name out and see. So it's very difficult to manage. It's just going to cause a lot of friction. It's going to cause a lot of problem. So what I would say is children should be brought by a male figure. Okay. And that's also for the child's safety, because a masjid can't take responsibility. It's a public place. The masjid can't, not most masjids have CCTV, but masjids can't take responsibility for a child to be just brought in alone, dropped off at the door, and the parent is outside and the child is just roaming around in the masjid. Some masjids are huge. And anything can happen to that child. Wala hawla wala quwwata. Allah forbid. So that's not appropriate. So a child should be chaperoned, okay, by a mature kind of, somebody who's above bulugh, or his father, and then it's their responsibility. As a father, it's your responsibility to keep your child with you. So it's better to then maybe pray in the second, third saf or whatever, rather than pray in the first saf. Also, then that's an age where a child is, as they say, discerning. The child can then sort of decide and say, oh, well, you know what? I know I only need to stay here until dad comes. I'm not just going to wander off. They're not going to be tricked into somebody saying, oh, come here, young man, I've got some sweets for you. I'll give you some sweets. And, things like that. They see a nice chacha and they think, okay, he looks like a very nice chap. I can trust this person. So, there's that element of it as well. So in short, I would say allow children in that are above an age that you can clearly see they can manage their, toilet behavior. It's clear to see. That's obvious. Usually you can determine that, and allow them in the masjid. If there is then reports of misbehavior by that child, Then you can give a warning to the father, say, look, my dear brother, you brought your child in. The child was absolutely causing chaos, shouting and screaming, and it's impacting the other people's prayer. So please, sit your child down, educate him. And if we follow the story of Khidr and Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, then I guess up to 3 warnings. The third warning is the final one. So 1 warning, 2nd warning, and then that's it. 3 seems to be a good thing. Talaq is 3 as well. 3 is a good witr at the end of the night, and maghrib at the end of the day. So let's stick with 3. You give 1 warning, you give a 2nd warning, and the 3rd time you say, look, you can't bring your child in. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. But educate people rather than making fast, hard rules about, you can't come in, and, it just turns into a point of confrontation. Educate them. Maybe share this video with them where I've explained why the rationale is for why children shouldn't be. And I think it should be based on a case by case, give benefit of the doubt once that occurs. And obviously, if there is unfortunately an accident, then that bill should be sent to the father and say, look, we're going to now have to get carpet cleaners out, and the carpet cleaner bill is X amount. You need to pay that brother. And that brother has to accept that. So maybe there's a notice which says, look, this is our policy on children, literally what I've said. If there is an accident, then obviously you will be charged for the cleaning of that particular accident. And similarly, talk about this warning structure, nice, simple policy, Masjid Falah's policy on children, put it where it's obvious for everybody to see. Once the trustees have ratified it, and therefore it is good to go, inshallah. Okay, so I hope that's been nice and clear, and Maulana has seen that. What if someone is a single father and he has an under 5-year-old? Well, if he's a single father and he has an under 5-year-old, I guess the question would come there is that, or the question has come there is that, if the child can discern between those 2 things, najasat and behavior, then, as I said, I wouldn't necessarily put a hard, fast rule. Okay, somebody who's like 2, 3 years old, then I would say, look, this person is very young. They probably might be still in their nappies or the pull-ups or whatever they're called. I don't know how long that lasts for. It's been a long time ago since I was a father, but it does, I guess, last up to about 2 years or something like that. So once they're beyond that and they're toilet trained, I think around 2 to 3 years old, you start toilet trained, don't you? Anybody there who's a recent father should comment on that. Any sisters can comment on that. So I think 5, as I said, I won't put an age. The thing you're doing is does he have the discerning to be able to behave well and understand about najasat? And does his father manage him? They're the 3 things. And have that policy, write that policy out. I don't want to repeat myself. It's there, just play it back. Write the policy out with the warnings, explain your rationale, and then what's it called now? Give the warnings, put that policy visible to everybody, even make an announcement in a Jummah, or make an announcement in when there's a lot of people gathered, and say, obviously, we're very happy to see, positively constructed. We're very happy to see that, mashallah, brothers are coming to the masjid, but they're not only coming to the masjid, they're bringing their children, alhamdulillah. However, we've got to do this in a balanced way, in maintaining the sanctity of the masjid, and at the same time being inclusive and open door to let as many people in as possible, and then explain the rationale. Go through it. You can even maybe touch upon some of the points I raised, touch upon the issues, the najasat, the disregard of the sanctity of the masjid, and how that can be policed and managed, but also talk about the safety of the child in an environment which is the father is completely concentrating on something else. We know what happens when we pick our phone up just for about a minute or 2, how we lose what's going on in our world. Imagine you're praying salah for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes. At least 5 minutes you're praying salah, and the child wanders off. The child could be anywhere in those 5 minutes. Anyone could have access. So, list them out. I don't know if this is Maulana who's on here now. You can even then share that with me. Let me have a look at it, and then that's it. That's good to go, inshallah. Barakallah feek. Okay, if there's no more questions, then we are good to go. I'll just give another 30 seconds or so in case anybody else has. Barakallah feek. If in case anybody else has, otherwise, inshallah, we can wrap up. And again, for those of you who aren't on the Markaz al-Ifta wal-Qāḍī Telegram channels, then please do join them. If you go to the YouTube channel, there should be links somewhere on there, I've been told. So you can join them from there. You can put your questions on there 24/7. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll be answered within those 24 hours. But what I do is when we collate several questions, then on Wednesday at 6 p.m. UK time, we have our Fiqh hour, or however long it needs to be, depending on the number of questions. And then we can answer the questions that have come through the Markaz al-Ifta wal-Qāḍī, but we'll also answer questions which come live during our streaming, inshallah. But that conclusion means that we don't have any more. So inshallah, we look forward to. Please do share these videos so others can benefit, especially this particular one, because it's on a topic which affects all masjids. And I don't believe masjids have a clear policy, or the policy is a little bit disingenuous. It's not. It doesn't really bring all the factors that I've mentioned into consideration, and it doesn't have a kind of a penalty system, so that the people don't feel that there's injustice done to them, because they said people get very emotional, as you can imagine, and at least it's quite clear there's a penalty. And of course, at the end of the day, as long as the carpet is then cleaned, it's done. But remember, the penalty is not just for the najasa, the penalty is also for the noise, particularly that child might be doing. I hear some people say, and I find that very strange, the masjid should be filled with the noise of children. What does that mean? The masjid should be filled with the noise of zikr of Allah. Where I have never seen anywhere that the masjid should be filled with the noise of children. Then if it's noise we're after, then we should get the noise of the insane. We should get the noise of a bazaar, a souk. We should get the noise of bay. In fact, all these things have been kept away because they make noise. These worldly conversations, debates, all this is kept away because this is a place of ibadah. This is just the dhikr of Allah. You should just hear the beautiful recitation of the Quran, the beautiful sound of somebody doing dhikr, the beautiful sound of some tadris, and that's it. You can just sit there calmly, get away from the rush of the dunya, and sit for 15, 20, whatever minutes, and just kind of, even if you do anything, just immerse yourself in that spirituality. The last thing you need to do is go there and you've got away from the crazy of the world, and you just got kids running around and screaming and shouting and jumping on you and whatever. That's not the reason you go to the masjid for. You want that, you can go to the park, and you'll get that, inshallah. So balanced, but at the same time, let's not get too emotional in this and sort of romanticize things which aren't a reality. Jazakumullah khairan wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.